We are very much looking forward to that. Before we start with the introduction and everything, I would suggest all of us Jana, could you stand up please? And Jeanette. Please, pleasure to have you here, Laura. I think all of you have received Laura's resume together with the invite, so I'm not going to go through the details of that anyway. I don't think we need to introduce Laura to anyone of us, because all of us will surely have this document, which is now being used all over the world. If there is any question about safeguards, legal questions, Laura is the person. And as you can see on the wall there, I'm sorry about our kind of improvised screen, but the other one would have been too big and too cumbersome to bring here. You can see the many places Laura has been at, and the many work-related things she has been involved with. So whenever there was anything related to legal questions and safeguards, Laura was surely there since the early 90s, I could say. Maybe I'll share with you my personal experience. I think Laura, we first met, you will not remember, during the IAEA course, which is the introductory course for IAEA safeguards, which all inspectors have to go through. It takes about 6 months, or I think at that time it is 3 months. But speech. Then I became the country officer for Egypt, and there were a lot of legal questions I had, and any time I had a question and I sent an email to Laura, she would just say, come up, let's clarify this and talk about it. Then I became involved in Iran, and again there were legal questions, and we have spent a lot of time together discussing the 2 trips to Tehran, where we try to resolve the so-called structured approach, which is now being renegotiated. Actually, this picture right on the wall is from that one of the meetings we had in Tehran. And what I can say about Laura is that, first of all, Laura is one of the few women who has been involved in this, all these activities, where there's mostly men who are present and who play a big role. And I know Laura has always been respected because she could always stand up to those men, and she was always respected. Everything Laura said, everybody just shut up and listen. So it's really a pleasure to have you here.
I started working on this last night and finished it about an hour ago. So first piece of advice, try not to procrastinate. Second piece of advice, don't worry about it, because if you do, you'll never change. So it was the 4th of July in 1985 when I received a phone call from the U.S. mission in Vienna informing me that I had been selected for a position in the Office of Legal Affairs, and they were asking whether I'd be willing to accept it. I paused for about 2 seconds and was living in Vienna less than 6 weeks later. I was hired as a P4 lawyer, the level of my appointment having been an issue which only recently was I given to understand wasn't particularly welcomed by everyone. They thought I was too young. I was only 33 years old with a little over 9 years of experience under my belt, only 3 of which were related to anything nuclear. I had been working as a trial attorney, defending the U.S. government in radiation injury cases, and I had approximately 0 experience in safeguards. I probably couldn't even place Vienna on a map, so I did know it wasn't in Australia. So when I was interviewing for the position, they asked me why I thought it would be any good at this position, and not because I didn't have any experience. And I said, well, I'm smart, I'm a quick study, and I write well. And as has been pointed out to me by others, there weren't a lot of other lawyers in the world who had any safeguards experience either. So, who'd have thought? Here I am, 28 years later, profoundly touched by your presence here. I can tell you that as number 5 of 7 children, I'm always surprised when anybody listens. So I'm happy to share with you some stories and some insights from my almost 3 decades of work here. I actually went to undergraduate school at the University of California at Berkeley, where Janice and I were actually at school together. We've known each other all those years. Sorry, Janice.
You know how old I am.
She was a very young student. It was during the Vietnam War period when the campus had become a focus of anti-war activities, and I became involved in student politics and helped run a number of successful student government campaigns, always for other people. I started law school at Hastings in San Francisco this September after I graduated from Berkeley, and I remember a representative from the student government coming into our class and saying, you know, you should run for student government, we should all be involved in it, it's really important. And I decided then and there that I would run for first-year representative, and I was going to run for student body president in my last year of law school. I did get elected as a first-year class rep, but I can tell you that I didn't give another thought to running for president for another couple of years. I had some things to do. And then I remembered that promise to myself, and I ran for and was elected as the first female student body president in the law school's 100-year history. Yeah. So, I then worked in Washington, D.C. for 9 years until that fateful day in August of 1985 when I hopped on an Air France plane to Vienna a couple of hours after having had emergency root canal surgery. Then, it was fun. I arrived, I got my badge. Badge? Really? Is this a factory? No, never mind. I was happy to be here. And I remember thinking, 6 weeks of vacation, what am I going to do with all of that? Remember, I came from the U.S. 2 weeks was a lot. Well, for a while I used it, but then there never seemed to be enough time to use it all. So I'm going to leave the agency at the end of November with 60 days under my belt, and I will have lost this year 20 days of the 27 and a half days which I will have earned this year. For a real piece of advice, use your leave. You need it, you should use it, and no one will ever thank you enough for having foregone it. There for a reason. One piece of advice that I got when I first came here, I don't know if any of you remember Dimitri Pericles. He was one of the original dinosaurs of sacred. Don't tell me I said that. When he saw me working like this, he said, you know, Laura, you have to remember, this isn't the United States, where people make themselves look important by staying late and working on weekends. There, if you work on weekends, people simply think you're not organized enough to get your work done during the week. That was my first exposure to cross-cultural professional differences. 2 months after I started, the only other lawyer who was doing HR retired, leaving me with nothing but files and no direction. Talk about learning on the job. I remember actually going home in tears many evenings, convinced that I was going to start World War III. Seriously, not kidding. And as it happens, I didn't, or at least I haven't yet. It's the good news about our bureaucracy, which sometimes is frustrating, but it's designed with so many checks and balances that it's unlikely that any one person would have that kind of power to make that kind of mistake. So whenever you get frustrated by the clearances and having to deal with legal, try to remember it's probably in your interest. Probably. So what have I learned since then? Sadly, not enough German. But I did learn Spanish, and I've learned a lot more as well. About safeguards, for sure. But about myself and this crazy cultural patchwork in which we work, probably even more, and what it means to be a woman in this environment. Some of the younger women here, Janice recognized this, even though she's young, she recognized this book. The reference to Venus comes from this book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. It was published over 20 years ago. by a gentleman who turns out to be the same age, born in 1951, in case you're wondering. The basic premise of the book is that men, by and large, share common qualities in their emotional needs and in the way they communicate them. And that women, by and large, also share common qualities, but different from those of men. That men and women, simply speaking, come from different emotional planets. Admittedly, it was written from a Western cultural perspective, and not all of the observations may be strictly true for all cultures. The author himself also stressed that these qualities weren't hardwired into men or women, that we might recognize in ourselves qualities that might be more generally attributed to the other gender. I know when I read the book, I found that to be the case. And while it was written with the intention of providing advice to couples and romance, the real issue was about learning how to communicate effectively with someone who speaks a fundamentally different language. And knowing that even if you are speaking the same language, the words don't necessarily mean the same thing to all parties to the conversation. The point was that when one wants to communicate effectively with someone who has been socialized so differently, it presents challenges. And of course, we suffer from the double whammy of gender and cultural diversity. Actually, I believe that we as women share more across the various cultures, perhaps than we share with men from our own cultures. And almost certainly, I think, more than men share across cultures. There's something profoundly unifying in being a woman. In every culture, we experience discrimination, persecution, abuse, lowered expectations, and fewer opportunities. We're destined by biology to bear the future generations, but here's the good news. We have the opportunity to educate them. It hasn't been all bad. I've actually had a pretty good run. But maybe I can tell you some stories and share with you some lessons I've learned. Have you ever been on a job interview where the man who's interviewing you asks you out on a date? This happened to me. That was 37 years ago. It was at the U.S. State Department Office of Legal Affairs. Being professionally inexperienced and certainly not quick enough on my feet to lie, I agreed to go to dinner because that was pretty clear what the answer was supposed to be. So we went to dinner, and as we got into the car to go home, he leaned over to kiss me. And as I cringed towards the window, he came back to the steering wheel and said, "Don't worry, I've already decided you're not getting the job." It was a long time ago, and I know things have changed. And I hope that if someone does that to you, you take every possible recourse. But what if the sexism is more subtle than that? I remember when I first came to the agency, and we had a meeting between the Department of Safeguards and EURATA Safeguards, the European Safeguards Regulatory Body. And both sides, them and us, were pretty much seated when I walked in. And Lebanese colleague, man, looked up at me, probably the last time anybody will ever say this to me, "Oh, Laura, how cute you look." Smiled, went back down, thank you, Tony. So, at the break, I pulled him aside, and I said, "First of all, thank you very much for the compliment. I really appreciate it and know you know as well. Second of all, it's not a good idea to do that again, because you just undercut my value to you as a lawyer." So he actually understood it, and we worked very well together for many years, always cordially and always respectful. Externally, this is the great story. My first introduction to cross-cultural communications in the diplomatic field was when I ran into a young Iranian ambassador who was and is still about my own age. I was introduced to him at a Puerto Rico of all places. And, of course, I held up my hand to shake it. He put his hand on his heart, he lowered his eyes, and he didn't shake my hand. Some of you know me. You can imagine how offended and furious I was. Fast forward 5 years later, I ran into the same Iranian ambassador. He'd become the ambassador to the Conference in Parliament in Geneva and was there at the NPT Review Conference. I was actually working as the second secretary for the Safeguards Committee. And he approached me in the margins of one of the meetings and asked me my advice as to how he could circulate a proposal his government had asked him to circulate. I explained to him the process and he helped me get the proposal circulated. At the close of the meeting, everybody else had left the big room and I was up on the podium packing up my files. And Ambassador Sultanea came up to the podium, hand over his heart, eyes still downcast, and said to me something that I will never forget. I want to thank you for your professionalism and your collegialism. I really respect the work you do. I tell you, that was worth $1 million. So while we never really saw eye to eye on the handshake, he did eventually look me in the eye, and he never treated me with anything but respect as a professional. 2 years later, when I was approached by a different Iranian ambassador, this new ambassador asked me whether I would be amenable to visiting Tehran to give a lecture on the additional protocol. And I said, well, Ambassador Slaby, you know I'd be more than pleased to, but first of all, you need to speak with the DG, and second of all, you actually already heard my presentation because it was given to my Australian colleague so that he could give it in Iran. Why? Well, because the DG sucks now. They'll never want to hear an American, and they certainly don't want to work with a woman. So I didn't have to explain that to him back in Lithuania. I just said, I wouldn't mind, but you have to talk to the DG, but you have heard what I would say anyway. And he said, but Laura, everybody knows that if you want to know anything about the additional protocol, they have to hear it from you. Now, talk about professional respect. Oh, by the way, John's colleague, his counterpart in Iran, when he went there to talk about the AP, was a woman lawyer. Okay, lessons learned, go quickly. Keep a diary and find a way to control those damn business cards. I've never been able to do that. Take chances. There is no one road to happiness or to success. There's no one way to get somewhere. I got here almost by accident. I always knew I wanted to live overseas, but I couldn't find a way to do it and get paid for it. So one day I saw a posting while I was working at DOE, a little vacancy announcement on the wall, and I went, Vienna, Austria. Not sure what that is. That sounds good. I have no idea what the IAEA is. And I applied for it. Lo and behold, I didn't get it. 4 years later, I was doing radiation injury litigation, and one of my very close colleagues came into my office in the morning and said, hey, Laura, I was just walking out my front door in Old Town, Alexander, and my next door neighbor was walking out too, and he turned to me and said, hey, Ed, you work for DOE, maybe you know somebody who might be interested in this position at the IAEA. And Ed went, I think I may. So he put the vacancy announcement on my desk and asked me if I'd be interested. Well, long story short, I applied. I got it. It turned out to be exactly the same job I'd been turned down 4 years before. The same job, the same office, the same desk, the same windows. A simple twist of fate. Okay? Find someone you can trust. People who'll be straight with you, and not necessarily a high-level person, and not necessarily just one. As someone who came to the job with, let us say, unencumbered by knowledge, I needed to be able to get the lay of the land pretty quickly because I had nobody to count on. I had no other lawyers, no experienced person. And I found a couple of people in the Department of Safeguarding whom I knew would give me the straight skinny. They didn't necessarily agree with me, but they could tell me, you need to know these people think this and these people think that. It was worth its weight in gold. I could go to them to find out what was behind the people and the situation, and rare with you, another one of my favorite examples. We're pretty strong women in this room, right? All those who think they're strong women, I'd like you to raise your hands. Of all those women who think they're strong, how many of you ever had a boss say to you, your problem is you're really too strong? Well, I did. And instead of asking why he would use that epithet against a woman, he would never consider that as a criticism of a man. No, I didn't do that. I said, no, my problem is trying to pretend I'm not strong in front of men like you who are threatened by strong women. I turn around and slam the door. I don't really recommend that response in many situations, but what to do in the face of such idiocy? With any luck at all, you'll never experience any of this. But in all likelihood, you already have, or you will, on some level or another. Maybe not extreme. Maybe just enough for you to start wondering about your own part in that relationship. Which brings me to the next point. I think each of us has to look honestly at how we communicate ourselves. You may use certain words as meaning one thing, while the listener may hear a very different message. That I produce. But sometimes it's gotten in the way. Again, how many of you have heard you're just too emotional? Now, I've heard that on occasion. Very rarely heard it addressed to a man, one man, Rich Hooper. Pretty competent guy. You're too emotional. It's usually used to put women down. But I remember another piece of advice that Dimitri gave me, and he was very mercurial and emotional. He said, it's okay to get mad or express emotion. Just do it on purpose and not because you can't control it. So, here's another thing that I just picked up on Facebook, and I thought it was so important. Listen with a view to understanding what the person is saying. Don't listen with a view to trying to figure out how you're going to respond to them. Active listening, engage them. And I'll tell you in that context a story about a friend of mine, has been an ex-boyfriend. He was leading the American team. I was leading the agency team. We weren't boyfriend, girlfriend then. And the Russians were on the third side of the table. Distracted. He was the one who ran the committee of the voters here, and he saw the fabulous job he did. He has a technique that I wish I could do. The Russians would intervene and say, we can't do this, we can't do this, and articulate a position which clearly the U.S. wasn't going to be able to accept. Dick would listen to it, patiently, finish, and he would say, let me see if I understood what you were telling me. And he would accurately repeat or synthesize what the Russian side had told him. And you see Khrushchev go, yes, that's what I meant, that's what I said. And then Dick would say, okay, let me see now if I can explain to you why that's a problem for us. What did he achieve? He demonstrated he not only listened, he understood, he got the message, and he was responding on a rational basis, not a power basis, and not a I don't want. It's an extraordinary technique that I've never been able to get that very well. I prefer I'm right, you have to agree with me. One of the world's best kept secrets, other women are not your natural enemy. When people say, oh, she doesn't like women, don't believe it. People are threatened by strong women. They're scared by them, and they frequently describe them as untrustworthy. Don't believe it. Find out for yourself. You make your own judgments about the people. They're no more our natural enemies than are all of the men in the world. And women aren't harder to work with just because they're women. Maybe some of us have more Martian traits, or maybe you have Martian traits that aren't shared by your boss from Venus. If you're not happy, change something. Accept your own part in dealing with a frustrating or unsatisfactory work relationship. You can only change your situation or the way you respond to it. You cannot change another human being. This was perhaps one of the most painful lessons I had to learn myself. Really painful. I was having a very, very difficult relationship with one of my supervisors. Just constantly being hurt and frustrated because he was doing things that I didn't like, didn't want him to do. I kept wanting him to be something he was never going to be. And I had a really, really bad moment where I really thought about leaving the agency. Luckily, I had a vacation and a chance to talk to my very best friend in the whole world. And she said, Laura, first thing, have you asked for help? Because you might want to look at how you've been asking for help. And she said, secondly, if you've been asking for help and you're not getting it, you have two choices. You accept the situation and deal with it, or you get out. This is what another boyfriend of mine described as being behind the power curve, or what Johnny Cash used to say is, know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Okay? So, please remember that making mistakes is a part of life. I had one boss who was just extraordinary. He said, you know, Laura, the only people who don't make mistakes are people who don't do anything. And if you aren't making mistakes, you're probably not learning. Here's another tip. Forgive yourself for making them. It doesn't have to define your whole life. I know I've made more than my share. Don't listen to anyone who tells you can't do something, unless perhaps they're telling you not to jump out of an airplane without a parachute. But apart from that, decide for yourself. Decide for yourself. You don't just try. And don't always take no for an answer. Ask again. Or maybe ask the question differently. In litigation, we were told, ask a question in a way that it is designed to get to yes. Don't ask the question in a way that for sure is going to get you a no. Okay? And don't waste time with people who don't, on some level, add value to your life. Doesn't have to be professional. Doesn't have to be monetary. Just people who believe in you and people who make you laugh. Another girlfriend of mine used to say, there's one important thing. Never walk out of the house without lipstick. I have a slightly different take on that, and it is never underestimate the value of great shoes. That's it. We had to go through kind of a tough part of Washington, D.C., and he had his window rolled down. Somebody threw a rotten tomato at him and hit him on the side of the head. There was no witness. There was no witness. I would probably, if I were in that environment, I would try to find a way to report him. That's just not acceptable. That is not acceptable behavior on anybody's time. So I would act on it in whatever way was appropriate, but not let it go, not at all.
Paths have come to me sort of at the final stages of our careers, and I will tell you, I lost track of Laura after the Berkeley days, but when I started coming to Vienna to go to the General Conference, I noticed, oh, there's Laura Rockwood. I know her. And she was always sitting at the podium. I said, wow, she's doing really great here. And then as the years kept passing and she was gaining more and more stature and she was very senior, I was thinking, wow, that's a really great picture. It was a really great picture for American women. And having come here now for the last 2 years, I turned to Laura for advice and counsel because she really knew and understood the agency well. And she knew a lot where all the faults were. And I could trust her. And I said, okay, just level with me. Tell me, kind of where to go, what to stay away from. And she was so supportive in that respect. And my husband is a huge fan of yours, okay? He went to Berkeley, too, okay? But he said, your agency is going to be at a real loss when Laura has to leave. And I don't know, I think she's always going to be a part of us. She's part of our legacy. And I think that, her heart is always going to be here, too, and that I could turn to her at any time, and she is going to give me the straight answer. But, Laura, you gave a fantastic today, and many of those points were so relevant, and I just want to thank you for sharing them because it meant a lot. I think each of us could relate so well to everything you said. So it was very poignant, very personal, and I really, really appreciate that. And I really thank you for all the contributions that you've made to this agency because you made it a lot better. And, we just owe a lot to you in terms of what you represent and how you carried yourself out here for the number of years that you've been here. You gave the respect to so many people, and a lot of difficult people, too. And so I think that's a real tribute to who you are, what you represent, how you handle yourself. So I just commend you, and I'm so proud of you. I feel so proud of knowing you.
Humanity. Don't forget that you're not always going to be here. That you need to remember that you have friends, that you need to remember that you have family. And for any one of us to whom our jobs are so important, it's very easy to forget that. I have to give incredible respect to women who are able to maintain loving relationships in their families, raising children and working. It's all I can do to struggle through doing just a job during the day. I don't have good advice. I'd really like to hear from somebody who manages that well. And how do you do that? Does anybody have any thoughts to help her with this? What do you do with 5 boys, for crying out loud?
One of the most important things is you have to find a good partner. And that, I think, is really, really key. You can't do it alone, and you can't expect to do it alone. So whether it's hired help or a life partner, a spouse, whatever, you got to have help. And I think the key is finding somebody that you can share your life with and share the things that you value together.
I have a
Bravo on the 5 boys.
I have also an insight on that too. I agree with Janice.
Out. Up and over. Okay? Really seriously consider doing that, especially if you're early in your career. That thing on your resume is never going to go bad. But it's very, very hard to move directly up within most hierarchies. And unless you're Muhammad al-Baradei, that hasn't happened all that often. But Janice, it might be good to hear from you on that one.
I would just kind of touch on a couple of things that Laura has already mentioned. My memory jogged correctly now. As far as the glass ceiling, I tell people in terms of trying to get to the next level and the next level and the next level, it's too distracting. You got to focus on what's in front of you and do it well. I think that is a real key to success. People will recognize that, and you will be lifted. in some way, more opportunities will prevail, more doors will open, but you can't worry about, the next level, how do I get there, because you're just too preoccupied with strategizing about it and not focusing on what you need to do. So I always tell people, do the job that you have at hand. I mean, I think that's first and foremost. All the things that Laura said about networking, putting yourself out there, don't be afraid to do things. I think that's sort of my message to you. I always hear from women about, well, yeah, there was this opportunity, but, my kids are young, or, my husband's not willing to, pitch in more, or it's too disruptive for the family life, or, and I recognize those are all big challenges for everybody, and the woman and the wife has to do a lot of that, has the big brunt of that burden, but don't be afraid to make a change in your life. Don't be afraid to make your family help you grow and change with you, because you're all going to be better off for it. I just see too many people, go back into the comfort zone, and they miss the opportunity, and then they're going to miss more opportunities because they didn't take that first opportunity that was before them. So take advantage of what's in front of you. Don't be afraid. Go for it, okay? And it's usually going to prove very well for you down the road.
Probably I will never tell you in public. You have been for me a role model for all the years. I joined agency 2002. I started to wear high heels when I met Laura. So I will never have this opportunity. I mean, you're staying in Vienna. That means I hope to see you more often than before. But when I look in all these negotiations about Iran and stuff like this, and I see all these males sitting on the table, I'm like, you will be very much missed. You have spirit, you have charm, you know how to put people in a certain situation that they just relax, and there's just one Laura in this world. Thank you very much.
Because of course for me, and of course because you fought for me, you won. Thank you very much.
It's having you here, and I sincerely wish you all the very best. We are still going to see you at least on the 29th. I'll put it in my calendar. I'm not saying bye-bye to you, but I just want to say, in the name of all of us, a big thank you. I'm not done yet. First of all, I would like to give you a certificate from WiN IAEA of appreciation. And the photo I sent you this morning, print out.
This is Jack, Max, Neville, and myself waiting in the room at the AEOI for the rest of the team to come back. And it was a great experience. I think you wear the scarf better than I can go on. But what an extraordinary opportunity to be part of that process. And I have to say, on a professional, I am so optimistic about what's going to happen between the IAEA and Iran and C5+1. Everybody cross your fingers, say your prayers to whatever God you can find, because I think we've got a chance of peace.
And by the way, Laura looks great in a scarf, and she has many different colors. And last but not least, as a present from Iran, we made a pistachio. Thank you very much, Laura.